Hello, hello. Thank you everybody for being here today. Today we are with the lovely Stephen William Hanna, author of Icebreaker. And today we're going to do a workshop about curation and how we choose the stories at YPQ and how we pair the stories and just kind of give both readers and authors some insight into how the process works. Because Steve is the first line of defense.
I'm the immune system. Yeah.
And we get a lot of submissions, so we want to let you guys know what we're actually looking for and what stands out to us most. Um, so without further
Yes.
ado, I've got some pretty. This will be a pretty like you're gonna have Q&A session here. What is the full process for how we pick our stories, Steve? Like from start to finish.
Good place to start is the deluge of indie novels. So this is the main problem with reading indie only stuff is that there's about 10 billion indie authors and 10 trillion indie books.
Yeah.
So I gather a humongous list on a big spreadsheet that I keep from a number of sources. Twitter or X, I guess now, is one of the main ones. I'll usually put a call out for that so that at least the people are willing, they're interested to start with. I'll troll through like big sales, like indie sales and stuff. And the first thing that I'm looking for usually is a either striking cover art, an interesting title, a good synopsis, all the things that you would look for when you're buying a book anyway.
Mhm.
Uh, but I put everything on a big list, and then to narrow it down, the first line of defense really is the first chapter. I'll read the first couple of pages to the first chapter, however long it takes me to make a decision. You can usually tell in the first couple of chapters if the author is the way that I would put it is if you can trust them to tell a good story. Once you've eliminated, I guess probably like 80% of the books don't make it past that first round. It's a fairly brutal round because there's so many. I have to be quite vicious, I guess, with it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then once you make it through that, you go into the short list. The short list is books that we'll try. That's the point at which I share them with Ryan. I'll send Ryan links to these books. Ryan will give them a read, and Ryan is the normie check against me because I like weird stuff, experimental stuff. I like weird experimental stuff. And Ryan reads like New York Times bestsellers because
I
he's
do
a
not.
well, not anymore.
I read in a very literal sense. So a lot of things go over my head. So
Yeah,
I more read and check for accessibility more than anything.
yeah. If Ryan doesn't get what is going on in the book, it's probably a bit too much or a bit too artsy or a bit too out there. And once Ryan likes it, I'll then go ahead and read it because I've got usually hundreds of books on my TBR at any one point. And if Ryan likes it, that's a good sign that it's got a good chance at going in the box. At
Mm.
that point, I'll read it, and if I have any major issues with it, we'll flag it up. Otherwise, then it goes through to the final stage, which is where we reach out to the author, get them on board. We talk over things like, well, this is Ryan's part really, but we talk over
Yeah.
parts like contract, how we handle everything, the interview. We need to set up times and stuff. Printing, if there's any edits to be made, we usually make little lists of edits and suggestions if there's any errors that we've found or misprints. And then we get proof copies, test the proof copies, and then we package them in. Then there's the author note, can be anything. We've had cocktail recipes as one of my favorites.
Yeah, that's really
Little
fun.
notes from the author, etc. Yeah, bookmarks. Ryan usually sends me the bookmarks that he puts together, and I'll tell him if the imagery and symbolism makes sense based on the book. And then we ship them out to our readers, our subscribers, and then we get a bunch of people together for a book club, and then we get the authors in for the interview.
And one of the other things I want to add when it comes to the curation process is like the initial weeding stage. We also
Yeah.
check the size of the story. Um,
Oh yeah,
because
yeah.
that's a key factor for us. Like some stories are too large, we gotta act some stories are too small and they might be better fit for novella corner or something else down the line.
Mhm.
But when it comes to the actual novels to feature in the stories themselves, we are we are a bit our hands are a bit tied there. So we're looking for like that 200 to 300 page sweet spot, as it were. And the
Yeah.
other thing that and we just did a I just did a workshop with Bo Huffman about creating cover art. And one of the things that
Oh
we want
yeah.
to say is, at least for me, one of the things that stands out always is I think this goes back to standing out in the deluge of how many indie stories there are. having good cover art says it doesn't just say like your book has good cover art, but it also shows that you're willing to invest money into your stories or time into your stories, which I know isn't the most accessible for people. But that is something that stands out because if you're willing to make that investment into your own story, odds are your story will stand just the way it's written better off.
As a counter to that,
Mm,
I don't think it's necessarily about money. And
yeah.
I like to keep things on the kind of, it shouldn't really cost you anything to put your book together if you do it correctly. I've seen some great covers made by authors
Mm,
or by their friend who knows a little bit about Photoshop.
yeah. I
You
mean,
can make a really
we've
good
featured
striking cover. Yeah,
yeah, we have featured authors with great covers that were just made on Canva. Um, so
yeah,
so there's
100%.
a lot of resources out there. So on to the next question, which is fairly similar. There'll be some overlap here, but when it comes to a submission, what makes it stand out right away? Does this have to do with characters? Does this have to do with like a gripping beginning? Like what grips you from the start? Because there's so many that you're reading through.
Yeah. A good author will have me hooked in the first couple of paragraphs. Opening with a hook is always great. You don't have to, but you should either be impressing the reader with a hook into a good story, with great prose that's good enough that I raise my eyebrows and say, "Damn, that's pretty good."
Yeah.
That's always a good sign because what I'm looking for is that I can trust the author to write a good book, to tell me a good story, because you're investing 6 to 10 hours into a story that length usually. So I want to know that they're taking me on a good journey that is going to be a worthwhile one. And you can tell that sometimes it's just character. If you can make me care about a character in a couple of paragraphs, that's impressive as well.
Yeah.
So character, prose, really sharp, well written dialogue does it as well, or just a great hook. It's either a good story, like a good story well told is ideally what I'm looking for.
Mhm.
I'd also settle for a great story decently told or a decent story really brilliantly told.
Yeah.
But if you go off that kind of reservation, it's like I wouldn't read a if it's a terrible story but the writing's brilliant, it just isn't going to do it for me. You can have beautiful prose and be really purple and slow and hard to understand, or you can do the complete opposite where your writing is childlike and
Yeah.
full of errors. But the story is great. That's not going to cut it either. What I usually look for, I say this all the time to people, the two things is it should be efficient and it should be evocative. And I
Mm.
try and stand by that. And by efficient, I don't mean it should be sparse. I'm not looking for people to emulate Hemingway or anything in as little words as possible, but you should be saying quite a bit in as few words as feasible, if
Mm.
that makes sense. Every word, everything should have a reason to be there, which is another thing I could briefly touch on, which is the deliberateness of the decisions made in the first couple of pages. It's really easy to just spew out some writing and try and tell a story, and like I'm doing right now, and it doesn't come off so great. But if I can see that someone has made deliberate choices in their words, and the way the dialogue is written, and the way that the characters are presented and described, and even just descriptive language, if it's beautifully done for impact, if decisions have been deliberately made, then
Mm.
that gives me a lot of hope that the story is going to be good. That gives me a lot of trust in the author.
And I think one of the other things, especially if we're doing like these first chapter crawls, as it were, these first
Mhm.
chapter reads, is when it comes to the first chapter tends to be the most well edited chapter as well,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
most
it's been read the
reread
most.
chapter. So because of
Mhm.
that, we put a lot of emphasis on it, obviously because it's the start of a book, but at the same time, if your first chapter has issues, odds are, and what we've seen from experience is that those issues are going to continue forward throughout the rest of the book. So if you haven't caught him in the
Also,
first chapter, odds are you haven't caught him in the 17th chapter.
and I've also seen the opposite happen where people get so bored of editing their first chapter that after a couple of runs, they just kind of don't want to anymore.
Mm.
Or maybe they don't like reading it over and over again, or they start getting blind to it. Also, I've seen the opposite of that happen where the book has a great first chapter and then completely drops the ball about 2, 3 chapters after
And
that,
I've
which is
I've
always sad.
definitely I've definitely experienced that as well when you send a book back to me and I'll get 100 pages in and it'll drop off. And I think that's the other thing with indie and self-publishing is that you don't have the team. I mean, you might have a team, but you don't have like this the same team as a traditional publishing house would have behind you. So, and I think this
Yeah.
is what makes the stories that do stand out so much frankly so much better is that the
Hmm.
fact that it's one thing to write a really good short story, or it's one thing to write a really good chapter, but writing, like staying consistent at writing 15 good short stories or writing uh, 25 good chapters. Like that's
Hmm.
a real testament to you as an author and a writer. Like you can tell which authors took the time to make the chapters look nice. And I'm not saying like draw these beautiful chapter headers or whatnot, but like paragraph indentations and making
Yeah.
sure the margins are right and this and that. Like those really do stand out, especially when you're experiencing both the highs and the lows of self-publishing right from the start. So something I also
it's
wanted to mention. But on to the next
it's
question.
probably the thing that I'm most forgiving of is
Mhm.
bad formatting because I know how hard it is.
Yeah,
And if your story's brilliant and your characters are great, and your dialogue's brilliant and your prose is beautiful and you've hooked me in, then I'll forgive some formatting issues. We can
yeah.
fix them kind of.
And
Sometimes
and
that's
we
enough.
certainly have. So it's something it's not a deal breaker by any means, but it's something as somebody who has to fix the formatting, please just do it from the start.
I'd rather not, but I will if I have
But
to.
I will if I have to. Exactly. Um, that being said, what are some instant deal breakers for you when reading a submission? These are the
Oh,
fun
I've got
ones.
loads of these.
Yeah.
Got some solid rules. The first one is if I roll my eyes at any point during the first page chapter, it's a no go.
Mhm.
And that can come from obnoxious first person voices I can't stand at all. And that's not just a personal thing. I know most people can't really stand when the first person voice is just irritating. If it's not done for effect, if it's not done deliberately, it would be easy to just say bad writing. But by that, I'm looking at things like purple prose, really overwritten. If
Mhm.
it's overcooked and it's got too many words for what's actually going on,
Yeah.
or on the flip side, if it's got not enough words and I have no idea what's going on, if I'm unable to build a kind of visual picture in my head of what the scene looks like, some genres are worse for this than others, but really cringy dialogue that's badly written. And badly written dialogue is dialogue that you can't read out loud with a straight face. And a good
Mhm.
test of whether or not your writing is bad is to read it out loud and see how it sounds, because that's what the reader is doing in their head. Also, predictability. If I read the first couple of paragraphs and I know exactly where the book is going, that might not be a bad thing. But if I know that it's going to be like if I read the first couple of paragraphs and I go, oh, this is Twilight, but worse somehow, then obviously I'm going to drop it out the gate. Uh, and cliche and tropes. I'm a big fan of tropes done well. There are so many tropes that it'd be impossible to not read a book with them. But if I read something that feels like a thousand other books that I've read, like a good example of that would be opening with the copy pasted Lord of the Rings prologue, where you open with a big battle against the evil overlord, and the evil overlord's going to win, but then someone beats him, and then but there's an artifact that's been stored away, and now an ancient evil is awakening. I'm like, I've read this a billion times, man, and you're not going to do it any better than anyone else has. Also, you're using apostrophes instead of speech marks, so things like that. Basic, really bad editing as well would make
Mhm.
me drop it.
For me, what I've learned over the years of this are that if you introduce too many characters in the first couple of pages,
Mm-hmm.
I personally get
Yep.
really overwhelmed. And then, like, if at any point I feel like I have to take notes while I'm reading, it's not going to be a good, accessible story for myself. Um, Typos and stuff I can be forgiving of because, again, you can
Yeah.
just, those are easy tweaks. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's if I find myself as a reader having to reread a sentence or a paragraph because I'm not quite sure what's going on, then for me, that's a huge, like, because I'm reading for
Yeah.
accessibility, I want to be enjoying the book. And if I have to pause to reread something to really like, wait, is that what they did? Is this where they are? That's something I personally
Yep.
really struggle with.
That and excessive amounts of proper nouns. If half the words on the first page have a capital letter, especially if the words like, the man goes into the canyon, but canyon has a capital C because it's an important specific
Yeah.
canyon or something. That's cool. If there's 40 examples of that on the first page,
Well, and that gets
I'm going to
into
throw it over my shoulder.
yeah, and that gets into world building, and that gets into like
Yeah.
show, don't tell.
Lore
And
dumps.
What do you say?
Info dumps and lore dumps,
Yeah.
not a fan. If you're opening with, if I'm skipping over paragraphs
Mm.
to try and get to the interesting part,
Yeah.
that's a
Well,
sign
and
as well.
that plays a role too when you have multi-perspective stories, which like if you're
Mhm.
reading a multi-perspective story and you find yourself skipping through one perspective to get back to the other perspective, that's a
Yeah,
flag as well. How do you differentiate between what you like and what I like versus what we think
Mhm.
subscribers will like?
I think I've got a good handle on this though, because what I like is usually not what we put in a box. Because the
Mm,
stuff I like is weird and usually quite bleak and challenging and probably a bit disturbing. And I like to be unsettled and left with strange questions and challenged a lot by what I'm reading. But that's not usually what our subscribers are after. You know, we like things that are a bit more accessible. We're going for broad appeal. From the start, I think I've had to try and get a handle on what an accessible story looks like. And that's well, having Ryan for that, that's a really good kind of litmus test for whether or not something will get past the average reader, like the kind of more normal reader, someone who just likes a good story told well.
mm.
Because otherwise, I mean, I'm still to this day sending Ryan like wildly experimental stories told from the perspective of a corpse on the floor or something like that for 300 pages. And Ryan will send it straight back and say, "We can't feature this, Steve. This makes no sense. It's all written in Latin or something, or pictographs. It's in wingdings, you know." I like experimental artsy stuff. But
Mm.
what I think subscribers will like is a good story told well. You can't really get any better than just a good story told well. And at its simplest, that means you want to find out what happens next. You want to see what these characters get up to. You want to see them succeed or fail, depending on what kind of story you're writing, you know?
Mm.
And the ease with which it goes into my head is usually a good sign of that. If the pages fly past without me really noticing, if I'm immersed, if I'm gripped, then I think that's quite universal.
Yeah. I think for myself, like I have my own personal genres that I prefer. Like I'm a big fan of dystopian, historical fiction, sci-fi, but through YPQ, we read across genres. And I think what I've learned over the years is that like I've learned to appreciate what makes a story good. Even if reading is very subjective. Like the books I like are gonna be very different from the books Steve likes, but I can still tell what makes a book good. I can still read a romance novel and appreciate it for how it was written and what it tells and the story that it shares and just the general storytelling, even if it's not my cup of tea. And I think that that's part of a big thing of what we do is that we're looking to kind of branch out on those horizons, and we'll get into that in like a few minutes. But to stay on topic, it's tough because I've definitely had my stories where I'm like, this is fantastic, but is this
Mhm.
fantastic because, or like my doubts, is this fantastic because I love it? Or is this fantastic because everyone will love it? And, I think that's a litmus test for ourselves as well to see what is working versus what isn't, and taking feedback from our subscribers and making adjustments as necessary. And specifically theming. So like this will follow into the next question of like how do we decide between stories and what tips the scale? And a lot of this has to do with themes. And I think we're always tinkering with what makes a theme a theme. Like I think we've
Yeah.
done in the past where we do two short story anthologies for a short story theme. Whereas in the
Mhm.
future, we might do one short story anthology and one more traditional novel and pick a theme between them. But we've had like themes of sisterhood, but we tend to fit within genres. But I think right now we're currently making a push outside to blend genres into a more thematic monthly box.
Yeah, I think we've moved away from in the first year or so of us operating in this way, we'd go for a sci-fi box, a fantasy box, a horror box, and try and rotate between them. But lately, especially as it's gotten, I guess, has it gotten harder? Certainly, I've read like over 1,000 samples of books now at this point, and you start to run out at some point, you know. But there's always new ones coming out, which is great. But I think our focus has shifted that rather than trying to find matching genres for the boxes, which puts a fair bit of pressure on us,
Mhm.
especially if like one particular genre has all but dried up.
Yeah.
Uh, just trying to find really good books and then finding ones that match each other or go or complement each other is the other thing. If we're going to feature a horrifyingly dark, bleak thriller with where you can barely catch your breath the whole way through. We might want to pair that up with something that's a bit lighter,
Yeah.
but more of an easy, pleasant afternoon tea kind of
Mhm.
read, to mix things up a little bit. So themes can be complementary, or themes can be more of a juxtaposition where it's
Yeah.
here's two sides of the same coin, or here's two books that are very different, to give you a kind of broader scope. But the thing that binds them all together is that they've gone through a pretty grueling process to be considered good by us in the first place.
And I think that's part of what makes our kind of turnaround time very different for submissions. 'Cause a lot of times, well,
Mhm.
I don't say a lot of times, some submissions we get in and we go through immediately, and other submissions we like test, we go, okay, this passes the initial litmus test, but this is a Halloween theme box and Halloween isn't for 5 months. So we have to kind of we'll read it eventually, or we'll get through it eventually, but it's not necessarily our priority at the moment. And then we
Yeah.
have to kind of manage all of that as well and be like, oh, this is a really good story, but we have a different story paired for this month and we need to find a pairing for that. So there's a little bit of tinkering that goes on our end as well to figure out just to get the timelines right. Because
Yeah.
yeah, we can go and pick two random stories and find a connection between the two, but at the end of the day, we do want the connections to matter. And we do want the
Mhm.
two books to complement each other in some way, shape, or form.
Yep.
That being said, though, when it comes to we've been doing a better job about and are gonna continue doing this, including short stories in the boxes, just because they're fun, they add a
Oh,
little
yes.
bit. And the short stories realistically will have no connection to the theme. The short stories are more like, here's
Oh,
a
no.
cool story I read. It's 2,000 words. Enjoy it.
Yeah, they're the little plate of like olives on the side of the main meal. You can just help yourself to them as you want. Just nice little picky bits. That's what
Yeah.
it's all about.
That's been my thinking with it as well. And I think it's also nice, like a little palate cleanser. And otherwise you get too sucked into the theme. And
Yeah.
maybe you don't like the general theme. Maybe the theme of like, I'm just picking one, A Stray Amongst the Stars doesn't
Mhm.
appeal to you. So just
Yeah.
trying to expand kind of what we offer. That way, even if you don't love a romance novel, you don't want a
Mhm.
romance theme, and the two stories are romantic themed in whatever capacity that shows, that you'll still have something for you. They'll still have something for you. One of the other things I want to say is some themes are more polarizing than others.
Yeah, totally.
And because of that, we try to, I don't want to say avoid, but we try to figure out the best way to go about them. And I use romance as an example because some people really, really hate romance and some people really, really love romance. So it's finding stories that have romance as a key theme, but not necessarily the
Mhm.
main theme is something that we also work on as well.
And some people are just really turned off by certain genres. And I guess the whole point of YPQ is to try and get people to move out with their comfort zones.
Yeah.
But you can move out with your comfort. Like, I'm not going to tell someone if they don't like romance, start with 50 Shades of Grey. Like I know a lot of romance fans who don't even like that. That's maybe a bit of an extreme example, but you get the idea.
Mhm.
Better to start with something that maybe blends genres a little bit. So maybe you don't like romance, but you like sci-fi. Well, here's a romance in space with between two sentient spaceships, which is a
Yeah.
great idea. I hope someone's written that. I
Yeah,
hope they
so
sent it
somebody
in.
write that down. So now we have the 9 minute mark. We've got two questions. I'm gonna switch them up a little bit. Over
Yep.
over the past few years, has your idea of what makes like a YPQ story featurable, what makes a story featurable for YPQ changed at all over time?
Yes and no. I think the bar's always been where the bar is. My push, my heart is always with the weirdos. I love the weird stuff, the unusual books. Over time, I've come to accept more and more that we maybe need books that are a bit more accessible. I would like to think that I'm on the side of the weird artists who kind of exist on the periphery and like to push the boundaries a bit. But
Mhm.
pushing boundaries isn't always the way to get people interested in a new
Yeah.
genre, or a new kind, or a new author, or a new style of something. And sometimes, people also really love familiarity. So I've probably softened a bit on things like originality and cliche, which I mentioned earlier. I've
Mhm.
probably softened a bit on them, and I'm much more willing now to consider books that feel like other books, if that makes sense. Like there's nothing wrong with just standard fantasy adventure. Nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that. I love fantasy adventure. I write it for God's sake. But It's nice to open it up a little bit, I guess. But
I
I don't
think.
think it's that much. I'm still looking for the same things that I've always been looking for.
Mhm. No, and I think that's a really good point that not every single story has to be genre defining or ground changing in any way,
Yeah,
shape, or form. Like you can just have a good story and enjoy the story
yeah,
for what it is. And I think
it
what's
can just be
evolved,
fun.
yeah, exactly. Excuse me. And I think what's evolved for me over time is like first off my confidence in being able to choose a story and because
Mhm,
I get really in my head about whether or not readers will or subscribers will like a certain thing that I know I like. And over time I've gotten better about that. But I think the
mhm,
thing that I've learned over time is how to appreciate a story more outside of my comfort zone. Um,
mhm.
which is more like a personal thing. When it comes to YPQ or whatnot, I'm more willing to give readers a benefit of doubt than I was before. Um,
Yeah.
because I guess to an extent, that's what we're asking our audience to do. Is that like, hey, take a chance on this unknown reader, on this unknown author, and like, yeah, like take a chance on them and see where the story takes you. And if you don't like it, at least you gave it an honest go. And I think I've also gotten better about recognizing when to read because I think there is something to be
Hmm.
said about reading for fun and reading for work. And if I'm not in the mood to read and I force myself to read, I will
Yep.
DNF every single story I start. So
We've
I've
definitely dropped books because you've read them at 2 in the morning.
yeah
I
yeah
don't
yeah
understand this. I
exactly.
went, of course you don't understand it.
But then I come back and
Yeah.
I've gotten better about coming back and giving books either a second chance or like a
Mhm.
fresh lens, as it were. So
Oh
with the
yeah.
last 5 minutes, I want to ask, and I will also answer this. Why is curation such a big part of what makes YPQ special?
I think because there's so many indie authors out there, like I think a lot of people really want to support the little guy, the little girl,
Mm,
whatever. Little girl's weird. The little woman, the little person. People really want to support the indie author. They want to support people who are out there on their own. They don't necessarily want to send their money to Jeff Bezos. I get that,
mm,
but supporting indie authors is difficult when there's so many of them. And there's a lot of great blogs and YouTube channels and stuff out there that try and cover indie authors, but there's never quite enough. And especially with things like blogs and reviews and stuff, you can never be sure how impartial they are. And I know when I was looking for indie books when I first started all this, it was really hard to find a reliable source of good ones because there's just so many, and someone's tastes are not necessarily the same as someone else's
mm.
tastes, and people end up getting a little bit pigeonholed. So maybe you might find one indie author that you really like, or two indie authors that you really like, and then you just stick to them,
Yeah,
which is cool. People do that in real life as well with traditionally published
yeah.
authors. But I think if you want to expand your horizons, I like to think of us as doing the same thing that like your Spotify discovery playlist does. It's like here's some stuff that you might like. Just give it a go. And it's married to this idea of trust and openness to new experiences. If you go into it with a kind of open mind, thinking, well, I'll try this, I might like it.
Mhm.
Then you end up coming away with, I mean, over the course of doing YPQ, I've found and met and got to speak to, and in some cases got to like go for a pint with like several of my favorite authors of all time, authors
Mhm.
who I'll automatically buy whatever they come out with.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to parse through the glut of indie stuff out there. Same with music, same with film.
Yep.
You kind of rely on other people's opinions to point you in the right direction and save you the time. You know, we're all busy. We don't have time to be reading 1,000 indie books in a couple of years and seeing which ones are the best. We don't have the time for it. So you can outsource it to us, and
Yeah.
we'll read almost everything that's out there and tell you the best ones.
I think that's a really good way to put it because at the end of the day, like a lot of people, especially with kind of the state of affairs at the moment, a lot of people want to support the little guy and just don't know how or don't know where to begin. And
Mhm.
yeah, like I think a lot of the famous and like successful self-published authors are just traditional authors who no longer need the middleman. They now have their own
Mhm.
team and they don't have to go through a publisher. But to take the time to find a new author, like we said earlier, that's 6 to 10 hours of your life to find a new voice. And don't get me wrong, once you find
Mhm.
that voice, like that author will forever be in your peripheral going forwards. And to
Oh
your
yeah,
point, it's been really nice to meet authors and to actually get to know them. And one of the nicest things that I've experienced with indie authors is that they're accessible. And
yeah,
like if you're a
mostly.
reader, yeah, I mean, yeah, mostly. If you're a reader and you're reading one of the YPQ stories, there's nothing stopping you from reaching out to the author. Like you can, in the book you send, 9 times out of 10, there's an email address. Like you'll see them on socials or whatnot, and they will any author who wants to talk about their story. And
It,
I think
it
that's
remains
that.
my favorite. Oh, sorry, on you go, man.
I was just say, and I think that's what part of what makes this so nice that you can reach out to like a famous author. The odds of you just being another piece in the puzzle, though, are pretty slim, are pretty high compared to reach out to an indie author that's got 9 reviews on Goodreads, leave them a review,
Mhm.
this or that, like, and it goes a very long way. And I think it further humanizes the process. But um, yeah, and sorry, I think a big part of what we do has to come down to the curation because it comes down to the trust. We are asking you to trust
Mhm.
us that we are picking good stories, and that asks a lot of people, and I totally get that. So that's why we take it really seriously, and we have a process, and we want to make this video to kind of help show that like, no, we're not just picking 2 books out of a hat. Like we're on top of it. We have a process there.
It remains my favorite, absolute favorite part of the whole process is like to touch on what you were saying there, is the part where I get to reach out to authors and tell them that I really loved what they wrote.
Yeah.
I really love their book because I know whenever it happens to me, it makes my day. No feeling like it than someone engaging with your work and wanting to talk about it. And that's my favorite thing about what we do is
Yeah.
getting to make an author's day really easily. Like it's totally free to do that.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, you could just tell an author that you love their work and make someone's day.
And
And
also make
probably
a friend. Like
yeah, that author will do anything for you after that.
But on that note, unfortunately, we got 10 seconds left. So thanks so much, Steve. And I hope you guys
Thank you
enjoyed.
so
And
much.
you got
Yeah.
any more questions about the process, just let us know. But yeah, take care, everyone.